Hello, Sister Degree. This is my applied research presentation. My topic of choice was students with specific learning disabilities in the online classroom. The reason for this choice, because as a public school science teacher, I have a heterogeneously grouped classroom. So I have all degrees of ability levels in one classroom at a time. I also assume that in the online classroom, I'm going to have an inclusive set of students as well. So I wanted to look into how I can better serve those students with specific learning disabilities in my classroom. As far as the research that I looked into, the authors were trying to determine if there was a correlation between students with learning disabilities and their success in the online classroom. And they did this by looking at the content and evaluating it with a UDL scan tool, which I'll get to in a little bit. Why is this important? Because as online educators, we are going to have inclusive classrooms and students that have disabilities, and they're going to be varied. So we're going to need to make sure that we do our best to meet the needs of those students in our classrooms to make sure that they have a fair shot of an education just like everybody else. As far as the methods go, how was the study done? The authors broke their research into the fully online classroom and the blended classroom, and they looked at the different methodologies utilized in those classrooms and specifically the content and how it was delivered. And they then applied it to a UDL scan tool. This scan tool was able to measure the effectiveness and accessibility of the content by asking a specific question set to the user that the user would then plug through, and it would give them an effectiveness score at the end of the scan. This tool works effectively by taking the UDL guidelines and the content that is input into it, and then using what they called a smart response system, which took the information and kind of expanded as you answered questions to determine if the accessibility was there. The tool was originally used on 6 leading content providers in online education, and that was kind of their barometer test that they used to see if this tool was valid, and it was determined to be. They then continued to run the tool on over 1,000 content modules within those systems to check for accessibility and effectiveness. As far as their results, their main findings, they determined that it was kind of a mixed bag. It was dependent on the accessibility and appropriateness of the content that they were given to begin with. And they kind of boiled it down to the fact that the content needed to be differentiated for the students, and this UDL tool was one way that that could be done. They really determined that it's up to the educational team to kind of be cognizant of the accessibility standards and look at the UDL guidelines and use that to better meet the needs of the students in the classroom. The research and justification for further research, the authors didn't really specifically say any research. However, they stress the importance of using applications like this to better vet the content that's going into our online classrooms. So as far as being justified, they truly were in their research. However, it may have been sort of a generic finding. For applications of research in the virtual classroom, as I said earlier, the virtual classroom is going to be inclusive as well. So having a way of determining the effectiveness and accessibility of our content is going to be a very useful tool that we can help bridge that any achievement gap that we have coming from the content directly. The tech that goes into it is essentially the UDL scan tool that this author looked at, and that's free. They also specified other programs and software exists, as well as communication between educators, making sure that that is a key part of the educational field. Okay, so as far as connection to our class. First off, we talked about motivation of students. So students with disabilities in comprehension, reading comprehension, attention, or even physical disabilities are going to have or could have some difficulty in school to begin with. So if you add a content issue on top of that, motivation is going to be really tough. So utilizing things like this UDL scan tool to vet information is going to be super important at meeting those students where they are ability-wise. This really falls into the UDL lesson we talked about, and how using the UDL structure allows students to build and grow in an education that's meaningful for them, and showing them that this is a learning process and not a goal to be won right off the bat. And as far as the INACOL standards go, teachers need to recognize that students bring different strengths to the classroom, even those with disabilities. So making sure that we encourage students to be self-motivated learners, and making sure that we help them embrace their education as a meaningful thing. Also encouraging and facilitating communication. INACOL standards really push that communication between the educators and the people helping develop the online content. All right, that's it for me. So thank you very much. I appreciate you listening.